What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Wednesday live stream. Chris, cheers. How you doing, buddy?
Cheers, buddy. How are you doing? Good to see
Excellent.
you, man. Long time.
Likewise, good to see you. It's been far, far too long.
I would
And
say.
yeah, exactly. A year. I can't believe it's been that long, to be honest, since I've had you on. So welcome. Thanks for coming on. Now,
Uh,
but before
go
we
ahead.
dive into it, I just have to show off those amazing hammers that you posted yesterday because they're
Thank
absolutely incredible.
you. I
Okay,
know, right?
look at this. King Hammer. Super gorgeous and amazing. Look at this thing.
And the
You-
photo doesn't do it any justice.
It's I wouldn't surprise you one bit. Like, it looks freaking amazing here. So this king hammer looks absolutely amazing, but I'm on the fence if I like the king or is it the princess one the best. Look at that. That's freaking amazing.
By far, mine's the princess.
Yeah, that's
I don't
beautiful.
think it's a hammer coral. I don't think it's para ancora. We're actually going through the process to see if it is a new species. So super
Oh,
excited.
very
It's going to take forever. Yeah.
How are you actually determining if it's a new species? Like, how are you DNA or genetic comparing them? Like, that's crazy.
Well, we have cross sections of all kinds of branching euphyllias, fimbriphyllias, and I have a buddy of mine. Everybody knows Reef Labs. I talk about Reef Labs all the time, and Gene has a scanning electron microscope.
Ooh.
So a couple weekends ago, Amanda and I went over to the lab so that I could actually see how the equipment's working and check out
that's
the
cool.
MS and the progress on getting the MS, ICP MS operational. And it just was really cool that we got to do that. And we had the periodic table of elements in front of me, and I'm sitting there looking at them, and I'm going, "Damn, I need one of these in my place." But then I said, I sent him some samples because when we first made fragments of some of our cultured hammers months and months and months ago, when we released our Prince of Darkness, I took cross sections of some other ones, and we saved them, and we cleaned them thoroughly from any living debris or any organic, and we went through the scanning electron microscope with all three samples, and we found distinct differences between. Well, two of them were identical, so I'm confident that they were the same species. But then the one was so different. And I posted the photos of those scans that we did. They weren't the best scans. Yeah, those. As a matter of fact, that there is not the one that we thought was different. Neither is that one.
Yeah.
I don't think we had the one that was different. I don't think I actually took a picture of the one that was different. But Gene, being a physicist and having a background in a lot of this stuff, he is very confident that we have more than one species with just the three samples that we gave him to go through. Now I'm completely addicted. Like, I got 4 new samples of 4 different corals. I want to take them down to the lab now and actually check them out because we didn't have a cross section of the princess.
Yeah.
But now we have, when I got the princess in originally, we put down actually all of these corals. This is their literal first cutting from the original polyp that we started farming. So Gina and I were talking about it, and I said, would it be a good idea for me to get a cross section of the original wild piece that we glued down to the frag plug, and everything above that is, of course, aquacultured in our facility.
Ooh,
so I actually,
that's interesting.
yes. So we got wild cross sections from the princess, the prince, the queen, the king, and the lord. But and I also got cross sections farther up in the captive grown colony. So that's going to be really interesting to see if there's any difference in growth internally. I doubt there will be, but hey, you never know. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. So there's a lot of fun and exciting things popping up here that we're going to be getting into with Gene and Reef Labs because
that is cool.
It's progressing really well, and the response and the customer base is growing, and as Reef Labs grows with the ICP OES and then the new MS gets released, he's going to be able to do so much more. And the exciting part of that is because of his credentials, he'll be able to we'll send the samples off to a university, and they'll probably request a polyp, a living polyp, so that they can actually sacrifice it and do DNA testing and look at other databases with taxonomy of corals. And if it's a completely different species, then
that's awesome.
I think we probably have 3 different species of so-called para-ancora. And if we get to name them, I'm going to honor my buddy, my best friend, Jake Adams, and I'm going to call it the para Jake Adams eye on the first one. And
That's
then
awesome.
The second, if we get more than one, then I'm going to name one after my family.
Nice.
And then I'll start naming one after my kids, and it's going to be really
cool.
I'd love, yeah. So there's a lot of exciting, fun things.
People can collect the whole family.
Exactly.
That is cool. So when you're, I guess, comparing them, are you like in the photos, like that's like super microscopic, like the skeletal structure inside of it. Are you comparing like the internal growth of the skeleton, or is it more like DNA testing to compare it? Like, how do you actually compare them?
Well, the first scans that you showed were the scans that were only like 12. They were 12 times magnification. That's not very. Yeah, it's very detailed, but it's not. It's not zoomed in.
Yeah.
Some of those other photos that are on that post that I put up, if you look at them, you can see at one point where we're looking at literally 1 micron of space where the little lines are, and 1 micron. People don't realize how small 1 micron really is until that was, I think, 2,000 times magnification on that skeleton. That's at what, 105.6 microns.
Yeah.
On that.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So.
That's a lot of microns.
Yeah. 1 micron right there. I mean, that is so tiny. But what was also really cool about these scans was the difference in the actual way that the calcium carbonate was laid down between the 2 that we know were the same species by looking at the scans, and the one that was completely different didn't have all that rigidity, like all the sharp edges to the way the calcium carbonate was laid down, and it was very smooth.
Interesting.
So, and he told me when I get more time, because I mean, we literally were there for 2 hours at the lab, and I think an hour and 15 minutes of that was spent on the microscope just checking out these scans. And I think I could probably spend the entire day there looking at
That's cool.
Coral skeletons, just to see the intricate details of what these amazing animals actually do when they're growing. And we actually saw, and the first thing that you put up that had like the 105 microns, that actually is we don't know if that's like growth, because it looks like rows or layers, like the rings of a tree. Yeah. If you saw that, I mean, that is freaking cool. Is that the growth we get in a day, a week, a month? That's what we don't know, and that's going to be the fun part, because I'm going to start documenting. Actually, I plan on taking cross sections from the very the split. So I put a single polyp down, and when I can actually, I'll document. Okay, over a month period of time, it went from a single polyp, it split into 2 polyps, and now I can take a cross section of the growth
and compare it.
So then we can compare it down, saying, okay, over a month's period of time, these rings, there's 40 rings in here, 30 rings in here. Is that literally a micron's worth of growth in skeleton on a daily basis, a weekly basis? How is it? So that's super exciting for me, because I'm just a geek.
the equivalent of counting rings on a tree in tiny coral form. That's really cool.
I know, right? But then you think about, okay, how is it with acroporas? How is it with montes? How is it with
everything?
Lobophilias? Everything. So the euphilias Fimbrophilia was the first thing we played with, and he opened up a can of worms that I might be visiting his place and taking up too much of his time here really soon.
I like it. I appreciate that.
Definitely. Acros I really want to see, because there is some species that I have that I bought as the same species, but they grow so differently, but they're in different systems.
Yeah.
So is it really the same species, just not getting as much flow, not getting as much light? And is that, causing it to grow differently? So that's going to be the fun part of digging deep into the taxonomy of corals.
Oh yeah, there's so many little things you could learn based off that too, right? Just, is it the flow that changes it? Is it different? Like, just how like we theorize these things, so no one knows 100%, right? They're like anecdotally knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, most of the stuff in this industry is anecdotal. Until somebody can actually sit down and actually do the work. Yeah. And it's a lot of work. I mean, we're doing a lot of research right now. I'm not going to talk about it, but it's with the University of Florida. And we're talking about the experiment that we're doing is going to be completed in about 2 weeks on this particular species of corals. But we're going to end up probably being a year till we have the data that we're looking for. So we already did some work with the University of Florida with acroporas and STN. And
nice.
What we found out is just totally different.
Tease. Just tease. I have to wait a year for this good knowledge?
No, actually, it's been since our first experiment was working with a professor up at the main campus. He came to our facility and we gave him some samples of some acros that were, I'm pulling my hair out. I'm like, why can't I fix this problem? I can frag it 1.5 inches up the skeleton, and months later, the same issue starts happening with this fragment that was encrusting and growing, and it's not what anybody ever thinks ever thought it was. It's not even like nobody. When I put this out, it's going to be like, what? Are you kidding me? Because it's not something you think of in an aquarium environment. Well, I'm going to say what we found initially.
Okay. I'll take it.
And you guys are going to have to do your own research to figure out what I'm talking about. Look up umocetes.
How does one spell that?
I'm going to say. Oh, shit.
That's part of the challenge.
Umocetes. Omicitetes, I think.
Okay.
Umocetes.
I'm Googling that so I can look it up later.
It's actually something that's very common. There's a lot of species of this, but this was not even what we found inside and what was causing the issues on the coral. So, but it'll give you a little bit of a hint as to what it might be.
Omocytes, also known as water molds. Interesting. If that's the right one.
But it's not in the mold family. It's in the fungus family.
Underwater funguses. I guess it kind of sort of makes sense, but dang. Because, I mean, people theorize it could be, a bacteria base or something, but I guess that's kind of the same alley.
This is just one form of STN. I mean, think about it. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you've seen acros. If you had acros any at the time in your reefing career, you've probably seen basically different types of STN. RTN is a completely different animal. That's here today, gone tomorrow. STN can take days, weeks, months to completely wipe out an entire colony if you're not proactive in trying to eliminate it.
So I have one acro, and it started STNing in the middle, and I think it stopped and eventually grew back over itself, and then it started STNing again recently. And same thing, very slow, and I'm waiting to see if it just stops and grows back over again. But it's like the weirdest thing. It starts right in the center of it, and then kind of stops, and the perimeter's still alive, and then it's like...
Sounds like the problem a lot of people are having with acros
but it's like
nowadays.
just one acro in my tank. It's like, why are the rest fine and this one is having these issues? I feel like you know the answer, but...
We're working on it. I mean, I've got some really good people that we've been working with, and it's, it's great to work with the universities, and I've got vet student that's out that's working on his PhD, and he wants to do it in coral biology. So when my veterinarian Roy Yanong at the University of Florida Tropical Aquaculture Lab, he sends me vet interns all the time. Like they don't know anything about corals. And the thing is there's not a veterinarian that anybody knows of that they can find that is a coral veterinarian.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
this guy Lee that is been doing this experimentation with us and doing all of the sampling of the tissue and I mean, it's so like I can barely do it because of, I understand why we have to do it, but I don't like seeing corals go through what they have to go through.
Yeah, it's sad.
It is, but I'm
is.
confident
Yeah.
that with what we're doing, even after all the hell we're putting them through, that I can save them.
Nice.
I will fight tooth and nail to save these corals and say, you know what? They're still alive. Science did not win and kill my corals. We kept them alive. That's the ultimate goal here, is to get the data we need and to keep the corals, healthy and thriving after we, fix the issues.
Yeah. Despite all that, like certain acros can be surprisingly resilient. Like if I've had some that basically were next to nothing and there was like, like a pencil prick of tissue on the rock and eventually it grew back into a coral again. So you never know. Like they are surprisingly hardy despite the fact that they can STN and be delicate. They can somehow come back out of next to nothing left of them. So
they're so crazy. Amazing. I mean, these animals, they adapt to, what we throw at them as hobbyists and as people that just love these animals. But there's so many things that we just don't know. And, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what we can do here now and in the future, because this data is going to be a game changer for the entire industry. Huge. Because we'll be able to fix one particular type of STN. I already know how to fix other types of STN, but we're also going to be doing research and studies to find out and pinpoint exactly, hopefully down to the species level, as to what is causing all these things. And I'll be honest with you, everybody that's on this, that's going to listen to this, is going to think that I'm nuts. They're going to say, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I have data.
They're going to say you're holding out on us.
No, they're going to be like, well, I just spent $3,000 on LEDs for my aquarium, and you're telling me I should put meadow halides and T5s back up. Yes, that's what I'm telling everybody. I think that LEDs will be the demise of living corals in captivity in time. And there's a lot of reasons behind it, but I think that there's ways to combat the issues with LEDs. I'm not telling anybody that corals do not grow, or LEDs do not grow corals. I never, ever once said that. People have listened to me talk about this topic before, and they twist my words around, and that's all fine and good. I just laugh at it because I never say those things ever. I don't think corals care. I think the ecosystem cares. The ecosystem cares about the light that's hitting them. And LEDs are none of them are full spectrum. I don't care what anybody tells you. It's a lie, and another lie on top of another lie on top of another lie. LEDs cannot produce full spectrum light. It's been proven. So full spectrum light, I'm talking about from the lowest nanometers all the way up to the highest nanometers. Yep. Your meadow halides can't even produce all of that light that the sun produces, but meadow halides are a hell of a lot closer than an LED by far. I mean,
you have a bunch of different like bands of it, right? That you'd be getting with an LED. Like there's going to be gaps in the middle of them all, right? So it's not full, but it's like here's a chunk of the spectrum, here's a chunk, here's a chunk, here's a chunk.
If you have minute amounts of that wavelength, it's being produced, it's hitting your water column. Yeah. So infrared and UV are not produced in the upper wavelengths and the lower wavelengths of the UV and the infrared spectrum. Everybody always says, well, if I go back to meadow halides, I'm just going to have more heat. Listen, we've done enough studies on this. This is the big myth as well. It's another lie. LEDs, yes, they don't put off as much heat. Why don't they put off as much heat? Do you know why, Devin?
Why?
Yes.
I mean, heat is excess energy, right?
Exactly.
I mean, if I put my hand under LEDs, you can feel the energy from them. I mean, sure. But the other part goes to the heat sink and then wherever else off of it. So, I mean, they're still putting out heat, just differently.
They're putting out different type of heat. It's not radiant heat like meadow halides put out. Meadow halides will put out infrared heat. That's why when you put your hand under a meadow halide bulb,
Yep.
and you put your hand under an LED, the difference between that at the same level is the fact that you're not getting any infrared that throws enough heat off to feel the heat. So what is that doing to our ecosystem that we have in our boxes in our house? Okay.
Well, yeah. So the difference. So if you have a reef tank that's lit by natural sunlight, you get full spectrum as it gets, right? Like you see people.
Exactly.
I mean, if they have a skylight. I mean, you're probably losing some stuff through the glass, but theoretically, you're fairly full spectrum. Yeah, you would do some of the UV and stuff through the glass, but yeah. But I guess
Those
here's
light
the
tubes actually dissipate all the UV.
yeah. I
even
was
without
thinking
the
that
glass.
you get the light, but you'd lose all the UV. But the glass kills a lot of most glass does, anyways.
Exactly.
Here, okay. Actually, this is a weird thing that popped into my mind. If certain UVB, for instance, doesn't penetrate glass, metal halide bulbs are made from glass. Anyways, I just had to throw that out. It just popped into my head. I'm like, how's this work?
No, you got that wrong. Metal halide bulbs are not made from glass. They're made from quartz.
Quartz crystal? Okay, fair. All right, I see the
Okay,
loophole
so
here.
the little quartz sleeve that's inside that holds the gas is that it gets excited by the electricity.
Yep.
The UV can pass through that with no issues.
Yeah.
And the quartz sleeve that goes around also
right.
allows for the majority of the UV to pass through. And
Okay.
people put their glass between the bulb and the water.
Yep.
That filters out a lot of the UV. It doesn't filter it all out because, of course, it all depends on the glass and the composition of the glass. You use Starfire, a lot more UV is going to penetrate through. Where you use regular glass, it's got a lot of iron in it. It's going to be absorbed.
So my theoretical guess here is the theoretical unknown research that's top secret, the fact that a lot of these UVs or these other spectrums are potentially killing off some of these bacterias or funguses that may or may not lead to STN?
It's a good question. Is the fact that there's no UV hitting the water column and no infrared hitting the water column not allowing species of phytoplankton and bacteria and microbes and other microorganisms in there? They aren't getting that. So what happens if you and I don't get UVB?
Well, question number 2, does a UV sterilizer offset that with LEDs and add it back in?
That all depends. I have a theory because I've been talking to a few. Jake's a good friend of Jake Adams has been talking to me a lot. His tank was doing phenomenal for years. It's a 1,600-gallon aquarium, and all of a sudden he started having issues. And I just finally got out of him what he changed last night. I was talking to him, and I had this theory about UV sterilizers for anybody that's using LEDs that doesn't want to graduate or move a step backwards and go back to the metal halides, which have been proven over many, many decades to keep an ecosystem healthy. I have a theory that if you have a UV sterilizer on it, and this is very plausible after talking to my friend last night, he had a UV sterilizer on his tank, and he's using the Acro Optics lights that are made in Colorado. Steve, I can't think of his last name. He produces them. He's a really, really smart guy. I had a nice long chat with him when I was out at the studio back before Reef Stock, and learned a lot about LEDs and the UV side of it on LEDs and how it's able to be done, but it doesn't last for very long. They're like 6 months to maybe 10 months of actual UV emissions from a UV LED because they just get broken down so quickly. But anyway, this friend of mine finally tells me, it's like, what else have you done to your aquarium? All of a sudden you start having these problems. It doesn't make any sense to me. I know you don't run metal halides and T5s, but your tank was doing great. And he finally started breaking down some things that he had changed. He's like, well, I have a closed loop, 6 of them.
Yeah.
He's like, and one of them had a UV sterilizer on it. And he's like, I was running 2,000 gallons an hour through it. And it was only supposed to have 200 gallons an hour or something like that running through it. I'm like, so basically you were allowing your water column to be exposed to minute amounts of UV. And you just told me you backed that down? He's like, I backed it down because I got dynos. He's like, and he uses the Abyss 200, so he was able to back it down to exactly what the UV sterilizer needed for it to actually sterilize and kill bacteria and parasites and this and that. And that's when everything started going in his aquarium.
When he turned down the flow through the UV.
It took about a month and a half, but all of a sudden he started losing corals, acros. And I said, now what have you done? He's like, I'm going to turn it back up because you just told me you think it's a possibility that my issues are because of lack of UV hitting the water column. He's like, and I might have just screwed myself and lost 70 or 80 colonies because I was thinking I was doing a good thing by slowing the water flow through the UV sterilizer. But in reality, he was probably killing the bacteria completely and not giving them that quick flash that they need to produce vitamins that are important for immune systems, which, again, this is all theory. There's no facts here. This is all just me thinking logically about the difference between an aquarium, the sun, an LED, a metal halide, and the differences. And I've become really good friends with Richard Ross. Actually, I knew Richard. I talked to Richard a couple of times, but since Jake passed away, I talked to him a lot. And he's like a naysayer. He's like, nah. He's like, no way. He's actually starting to change his tune a little bit on the whole theory that I have that, UV and infrared are actually extremely important for the ecosystem to thrive long term. And again, I'm not telling you can't use LEDs over your aquarium and grow corals. But if you have problems, don't just say it's acropores. Oh, that's just acropores. I am not satisfied with that answer from anybody. That's why we're doing all the research that we're doing, because you can't tell me that it's just acropores. Why are there not just random dead acropores all over pristine reefs? If that's the case, if your tank is pristine and there's nothing wrong with it, and you're duplicating what the wild has to offer to it, then
there's never nothing wrong. Every time I see a post, they're like, my parameters are fine. Like, obviously they're not. Something's off. But anyways, besides the point.
It's like a pet peeve of mine to hear people say, oh, that's just acros. That's a cop-out. That's somebody that doesn't want to learn more, in my opinion. That's okay. I'll do it for them because I want these animals to live long-term, and I farm corals. So the reason why I'm doing all of this is because I can't afford to replace corals if we can't get corals when they don't allow corals imported. So if I don't start working on all these theories that I've had in my head for years, I better start figuring them out now, because it's not going to be too far off, and we're not going to be allowed to get corals into the United States anymore, or they're not going to export them anywhere. And what we have in our aquariums is all we're going to have. And if LEDs are the main source of light and my theories come true, we're not going to have any corals in captivity. They're all going to be dead.
You need two identical tanks, with one with LEDs and one with other lighting, and then see if there's any noticeable difference over time. It's so hard, though. Yeah.
I did it already. I set up a brand new. I haven't talked to you in so long, Devin.
It's been a year. Well, at least since we've streamed, but far too long, Chris. Far too long.
When the last stream that I had with you a year ago, I had my newest farm system was only a year old, and I only had 2,500 gallons onto it. A year ago, when we had our chat, like a couple of weeks later, is when we put the last 2,000 gallons worth of water on there and got everything going. And that was I went all LED. I went 100% LEDs on the entire system, and I put in some tester corals. I put an acro that I had an abundance of, and the thing was doing great. I put a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I was like, okay, the system is 100% ready. These corals are doing phenomenal. So my whole goal was to remove all of my euphyllias and fimbriphyllias out of one of my other farm systems and move them into the bigger system and farm them there. Well, I did. I had gold torch corals that I had gotten on my last shipment from Indonesia in 2018. When the ban came into effect, I stopped selling them, and I had actually I only had 2 colonies left, which was like 8 polyps. So I took those 8 polyps and I put them on my farm. There was 72 of those polyps when I added them to my new farm system lit with LEDs, where they were growing for years with metal halides and T5s. I took them out of there and put them in that system. They were doing phenomenal until, I don't know, I think I took them out of there like about this time. and I put them into the farm, all LEDs. And about 3 months into it, it was like July, I started losing polyps for no reason. And I'm going, what the hell am I doing wrong? ICP tests were coming back perfect. Water flow's good. Nitrates, phosphates. I mean, I can't figure out what's going on. And I'm actually doing more and more ICP tests thinking there's got to be something in there that I'm missing. And there was nothing. You know, the water parameters on coral on farm 1 versus farm 3 were almost identical. So I know for a fact it had nothing to do with my water parameters, the water flow, and just whether the system was healthy enough for the corals. Tulio from Reef Bright comes down and he goes, I think I know what you should try. Move the rest of those back under your meadow halides and T5s and see if this continues to happen. It all stopped. It all stopped immediately. Even the polyps that I thought were going to be gone in the next few days all recovered and came back. So I put another one back over there to see what would happen. A couple of weeks later, it's going downhill. Moved it back to the meadow halide T5s, perfectly fine. What the hell is this?
So you need to try changing the lights, but leave the water and the flow and everything else the same next to see.
No.
It'd be a good test. Be a good test.
I can't do it. I can't do it. That farm system that I would have to do that with has been set up for 10 years.
Fair.
And
That's fair. So, yeah. One thing I found interesting, Abe from Coral Euphoria, I had on a long time ago, a while back, and he has 7 different tanks. They're all plumbed together. It's all the same water. And like one tank can be thriving and another tank has issues. Like even though it's the same water volume, he had like vastly, different stuff in every tank is its own little ecosystem, which is interesting. Because it's the same body of water. You would think it'd be the same, but I guess, the bacteria is living there. Everything else still, can be vastly different, which is interesting.
Yeah. It's I saw that at Jake's studio when I was out there. He had the 2 main coral flats that were connected together, and then he had everything along the one wall was all connected to those 2 coral flats. It was like a 700-gallon system, and he had some issues in one of those tanks, and together collectively we fixed his problem. And that's actually one of the things that we're really working on, finding out more data on so that we can actually release it, because that could be a really big game changer for the industry as well, to help keep corals alive long term when we had issues. And it all went back to me talking to Jake, and Jake going, no, that's not it. It's not meadow halides and T5s. The LEDs are not the problem. And right before he went, we were at Aquashella. Jake and I were at Aquashella in, where was that? Chicago. And he was starting to see what my theory was. And he's like, I think you might be onto something here.
Yeah.
And it really sucks that I don't have him to freaking talk to and brainstorm about anymore, because he helped me get through so many different things that I had theories about. And I'm starting to get some closure on, or not closure, but some, other avenues and other people, and networking with other people to brainstorm about this stuff with. But God, we miss Jake. He was always open-minded to all the things that I had to say, and always wanted to learn more about why I thought that way. And I miss the guy. He's
definitely
missed by a lot of people.
No, definitely is. So, okay, before I forget about this, in the chat, Manoj was asking, ask Chris opinion on LED and T5 hybrids. Yes, that one a while ago. What do you think?
Sure.
What do you think of the hybrids?
I think it's a great idea, because you are getting a fuller spectrum of lighting out of the T5 than you are out of the LEDs. And I think that I don't think it's as good as meadow halide, but it's definitely better than missing some of those wavelengths that you're not getting from LEDs. So I welcome it to anybody that wants to try that. I think it's a very smart thing to do, because LEDs are strobe lights, and LEDs are all blue out of the factory until they put a coating on them to make them change colors. So
the phosphorus.
Exactly. So that was the first thing for me, was the fact that they're a little miniature strobe light. And I'm going, there's no way. And then when you dim your lights and you don't run them at 100%, that's when they strobe, and you can actually slow down a camera and see it. Try it later. I don't know. For me, it's like, okay, when I was younger and I partied, we'd have strobe lights on. We'd be dancing around. You know, I couldn't stand that for very long. I couldn't imagine being a freaking fish or a coral living in a strobe light my entire freaking life. I just couldn't imagine what that does to their head.
I've seen that on electronic screens, but not on a reef tank. I'm actually going to try this now because now you got me curious. I'm going to put the camera on some crazy shutter speed and just see what happens. I need to know.
If you're at 100%, it's going to be hard for any camera to capture it because it's, you know, so fast. But if you put them at 10%, I'm sure you'll be able to capture it with no problems. But, you know, it's not a consistent, constant light source like a point of source light, like a metal halide or a T5.
I can get up to 4,000 frames per second. I'm going to try it. I am legitimately curious to test this now. You've piqued my interest.
You got to videotape it and record it and post it.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll try now. We will. This is interesting. I'll be like, okay, 50%, 100%, see if there's a note, if I can notice it or not. Mm-hmm. Yep, it'll be good.
So yeah, I think anybody that wants to use the LEDs, I got no problems with them. I just personally will never use a strict system with strictly LEDs on it again after the problems we had with my prize torch squirrels.
So So if I'm hearing this right, you think it's wise for anyone that has LEDs to also run UV to add it to their water column?
I think, and again, this is just a theory. And after talking to my friend, it seems very plausible. You know, I think that if you have an aquarium and you don't use metal halides and T5s, I think it's a very good possibility you can get your UV that is necessary for your water column. Now, you're not going to get your infrared, but you will get the UV if you run an oversized pump running probably between 5 and 10 times the amount of water through your UV sterilizer that is what is used normally for the sterilization process. But running it fast through it's not going to kill your bacteria, but that bacteria very possibly could absorb that UV and create vitamin D, which the corals will eat the bacteria, which will boost their immune system.
Fair enough.
Just like you and me, we have to have UV. If we don't have it, we're not producing vitamin D.
There's more rabbit holes here. So
there is.
Most people put UV on to kill stuff. You're supposed to go slow and kill the bacteria and kill all the stuff. So you're putting it through fast enough where you get a dose, but you're not killing it, right? Essentially.
Right.
I guess you're not killing, you're sterilizing it so it doesn't reproduce. So you're giving it low dose, higher flow. You're inspiring me to turn my UV back on. It's actually been off for a little while. I'm going to turn it back on just for you, for theoretical. I like your theory. I'm going to try it.
Put a big ass pump on it. You know, that's all I say. Don't run what the manufacturer says, try to 10 times that through it so you're not destroying the bacteria that are going through it. Because it will. I mean, that's what they're meant for. Yeah. So we use UVs on all of our systems. But we use them the way they're intended to be used because of pathogens that we see from wild corals coming into our wild coral systems. I use UVs on my new farm system. The only reason I even put it on there was because of the issues I was having with the LED only system. But I didn't have this in my head back then to try doing this before I put the metal halides and T5s back up. So now I ended up putting up, 8, 12, 32 more metal halides, another 140 T5s, and I still have my coral cares, and I still use my reef brights. So
special blend.
It's a very special blend.
Yeah. Okay, so
but it works.
All right. So maybe right now this one, Josh was asking, can you ask Chris, are there any spectrums of T5 or metal halide that seem to be more effective? Is there any certain ranges that you think is kind of like the key to?
When you break it down and you look at the spectrographs of all the different Kelvin temperatures of metal halides, they all produce a little bit of every wavelength that pretty much a 65K or produce and even down to a 22K megachrome will produce. They'll all produce the wavelengths, but if you want more UV and more infrared, you're going to get that from, say, a 65K or 55K metal halide. But that's going to be a very ugly look to your aquarium. I actually like the 65K look with some accents with LEDs and or actinic lighting. I think it looks so natural, and it's not going to make your corals brown, if anybody's worried about that. I mean, God, it's the biggest, another big myth about LEDs on the, I mean, I grow all my corals under metal halides, T5s, and some LEDs. And when I take them out of the metal halides and stick them under the all blue, royal blue lights of the coral cares, they are insane looking. And they are, most of my acros aren't even grown under any real LED source. It's accent. So
it's for a little
myth,
pop.
It's a matter of the fact that the royal blue just makes those pigments shine better. It's all still there with metal halides. But so I would say, to answer his question, any metal halide is going to produce infrared and UV in enough of a percentage to do what we are looking for it to do. And again, what are we looking for it to do?
Okay.
I don't know, but the theory seems plausible, and I've got a lot of people backing me up on it now that I've been talking about it more. And I just wish I had the cash to actually fund an experiment, but I know what this experiment's costing that we're working with these corals we're working with now, and I'm going, okay, I thought I was getting paid to do this. Now I'm not going to get paid. It's going to cost me a couple $1,000 for this experiment, but then the university's invested, I think, like $7,000 or $8,000 into this. Plus, they got the aquarium that's going to be doing all the testing, which is another probably $8,000 or $10,000. So we're talking about $20,000 just to do an experiment on one aspect of shit in my head.
Hey, keep the shit in the head rolling, because I love these things. This is a great rabbit holes. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I have another rabbit hole for you. Okay. So if the theory, I guess one theory is it is, can be funguses or bacterias or molds and stuff that cause STN. And part of the theory from the UV is giving that vitamin D to the coral, the bacteria which the corals eat, and hopefully helping them out. I guess one random thought is, back in the day, I remember people used to be trying to dose vitamin C to their tank and stuff. Would adding vitamin D supplement to the tank help anything? Who knows?
I think it would. I mean, honestly, that's something that, of course, isn't talked about. I still add vitamin C to my systems. When I get new corals in, they get a shot of vitamin C.
You do that? I haven't.
I've done that. I've been doing that for over a decade.
I haven't even thought about that in years until tonight. So.
I'm not going to mention the company I used to use, but a vitamin C supplement is a vitamin C supplement. And if there's a company out there producing a vitamin C supplement for your aquarium, I suggest that it's something that's not going to harm your aquarium in any way, shape, or form. I think it's going to benefit it because I see benefits from it. But I also know that I don't dose nearly as much vitamin C as I used to because of the way we maintain our parameters now, which is completely different than what it used to be. We had that chat, a year ago and probably a year before that. So we're looking at, we won't mention it, but I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. That made such a big difference in everything, because when we're receiving corals that are wild, they're used to water parameters of the ocean. And we were never giving them those water parameters unless it was the alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium. That other important parameter that nobody talks about, it is forbidden. It is not chased. You don't chase that one. I disagree. But when we started getting that stabilized at more natural seawater levels, our losses on our corals from import went down tremendously. I mean, we would get in, our suppliers are so good that we would have an average of 2% DOA. And then we would probably lose another between 5 and 10%. Now, if we lose 5% total, I'm going, bad shipment. And people are like, bad shipment, 5% DOA. I'm like, yeah, I'm not happy with that because something's not right. Something, it was in the box too long, something wasn't packed right, and that's why we ended up losing 5% instead of 2%. Again, it's all about the animals. I can care less about everything else. The animals are the important thing, and whatever I got to do to make sure that they're happy is what I'm going to do.
Okay, I have another rabbit hole for you. How do you feel about the bacteria dips and treatments, for corals, LPS? I know there's people use Cipro and whatever the other one is, those basically antibacterial sledgehammer dips to save corals if they're going downhill. Have you tried those? Do you use them? What's your thoughts? Oh, you're
I'm
frozen.
not going to really talk about
Okay,
what we're
there we
doing
go.
because it's part of what I've been working on for 2 years.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to really talk about the antibiotic treatments. It's too new. I don't have the data that I need to be comfortable with giving out that information. Have I helped people that have been in dire need? Yes. But I don't think it's smart to just throw out what we're doing to just everybody to start throwing antibiotics around like it's something that you can do. Antibiotics are not good for this planet. And if people don't get their heads around that aspect of medicine and they just start, it makes me cringe to hear people using Cipro.
Yeah.
Cipro is nasty shit. I mean, it is nasty, nasty stuff. I mean, the reason why I would never, ever use Cipro in an aquarium is because my beautiful daughter is 17 now, soon 17. Good God. When she was a year and a half, she had a really bad MRSA staph infection. And the last resort at the hospital of hearing, I sat at the hospital with my daughter screaming bloody murder for probably, what was it, 3 days straight, and antibiotics. And they came in and made me sign a paper so that they could administer her Cipro.
Is that that intense stuff?
I didn't have to sign a paper for any of the other ones.
Yeah. Huh. Crazy.
It's nasty. I mean, this was what, this is 15 years ago. This is 15 years ago. But at that point in time, Cipro wasn't very commonly used in humans. I mean, it was being used, but it was the last resort. Yeah. So that's why I had to sign a paper. I'm like, why do I have to sign this? Well, because Cipro is a pretty intense antibiotic, and we just want you to know how that it can really affect all the bacterial levels in her body, and it could be detrimental. Yeah. So that was the last thing I could do. I signed it, and they gave it to her, and history's over. Now I fixed the problem right after that because I didn't want that stuff going in her body any longer. So it was literally on an IV drip for a few minutes. Yeah. Before I called them and said that everything was good to go. Anyway, so my point with this whole thing is Cipro is so bad, and people that are just throwing it around and saying, "Oh, I just use Cipro, just use Cipro." Where's you putting the Cipro? The Cipro doesn't get broken down; it stays as an antibiotic. And when you dump it down, what do you think we're doing to this planet? Yeah. Antibacterial soap is the devil. Cipro is the devil. If you're using it on your aquarium, figure out a way to make sure it's inert before it goes back into the environment, because it's going to kill and kill and kill bacteria for a long time.
It doesn't even break down?
The education system in this world, I don't think it does.
That's crazy. Well, I've used it once for a dip on a bunch of euphilia, so this is crazy. I've only used it once, Chris, but I have done it once on a bunch of torches. So that's why this is very interesting.
I get it. It would be a last resort for me to use it, and I would try to do everything I could to dispose of it properly. Because the more antibiotics that go down our drains and into our waterways, it's a ticking time bomb for human beings and this planet. And I don't care what anybody says. When you kill the microfauna on this planet, the bacteria, the original things, we're all dead. Yeah. So I just think it's not smart for people to be throwing around that nasty antibiotic. That's why we're doing what we're doing, because there's a lot less potent antibiotics out there that can do the same thing, that are very similar to Cipro without times more potent than
like UV,
what we're working with.
Much safer.
If that says anything.
Much safer for UV.
Yeah. So exactly, UV will work too. Right, but when the animal itself is infected, we've already figured out what we need to do to fix the problem, to back it up, and to get real fine-tuned studies done so that we can actually put real information out that's concrete, that's proven. And right now it's not proven. It's still in its testing basis, basically. I'm happy with what we figured out, and I'll be happy when we get out more data so we can get this rolling.
So that leads me to the question: when do you think you will have some good stuff to release about all these studies?
I should have more data in the next few months
Yeah.
to have exact. But in a few months, I should be able to talk about it a little bit more,
Okay.
where I'll feel more comfortable about things, especially if everything that we've come up with and everything that we know we have seen and observed.
Hmm.
If the same things are seen and observed, then I'm confident in it. And
Yeah.
it's. I think it's important to finish the study before it's broadcast. And
That's fair.
I did tell a few people, and I got a few apologies from a few people that have passed it on, and now it's kind of out there. So I'm sure you can
Mhm.
find it. I don't want to be the one to talk about it anymore.
That's fair. I'm gonna
So
lure you back
yeah,
on in a few months
is it
when the
clear
time
on
is
the
right.
video, or is it
Now
like
you're
I'm
super
looking at this
choppy.
thing?
You're choppy. I can hear you for the most part fine,
Even on the
but your
video
video's
that people
choppy.
are looking at,
Yeah.
the people when people are,
That happens on Wi-Fi, man. Russian roulette.
that's weird because I got it plugged in directly too. Sorry about that, guys.
It's okay.
Everybody directly plugged in.
Your audio's overall pretty good, so
It's,
just your video's a little pixelated.
they don't need to see my they don't need to see my ugly mug anyhow.
I can still see a pixelated smile. It works for me. Uh, it's starting to improve. Okay, in a few months, when the time is right, let me know. I'm gonna lure you back on so we could dive more into this.
Well, what we already had planned was Julian Sprung was the one that turned me on to this because he was working with the Frost Science Museum.
Yep.
And Julian deserves all the credit for the beginnings of this, and then what we have done with it, what the Florida Aquaculture Lab, Tropical Aquaculture Lab has done with it. It all started because of Julian Sprung. So
Nice.
he's the man that made this all happen. If without his brain and his thought process, and Zach and his veterinarian at the Frost Science Museum, without all of that, we wouldn't even be where we are today with this experimentation. It's been already 2 years of working on it. So
Nice.
yeah,
Well, it's a good rabbit hole. I think it's gonna help a lot of people long term.
I do too. It's going to help
Okay.
corals. That's the important thing. It's
It is.
helping the corals.
If everyone's more successful, especially when we can't get more corals from the ocean, I mean, it's win-win for everybody.
Exactly.
Okay, question from Will. Any advice on dealing with brown jelly disease? I've had my first run with it on a few hammers. What happens at the farm if you come across it? Is there any hope, any methods?
I don't know what brown jelly disease is.
It's when euphilia just turns
No, I'm
goopy.
joking. I'm joking.
That's all I got.
I'm being sarcastic because
I figured so.
I don't see brown jelly disease.
Mhm.
I already figured out brown jelly disease a long time ago, and nobody believes what I have to say about it. I'm going to tell everybody
We're
here,
waiting.
right now.
What do you got?
The biggest thing, you're going to all say, but you talk about pH all the time. Okay, I said I wasn't going to say pH. pH is so important in your ecosystem that you're keeping in that little box in your house. pH is the most important parameter. It dictates everything.
Yeah.
Alkalinity, chasing your alkalinity is a money pit. Chasing your pH is not. If you get your pH stabilized, you're going to see a lot less issues in your system. I guarantee you. I learned a long time ago alkalinity was a big contributing factor with brown jelly disease. We import corals from all around the world.
Yep.
Where they allow us to get them from. I used to get so upset because euphilia and fimbrophilia permits are so limited. And, for me as a wholesaler to get 100 colonies of euphilia on a permit, they were gone in 2 or 3 days, and if you get them in and you lose 10 of them to brown jelly disease, I was determined to figure the problem out. And we learned back way before I ever started working with pH that alkalinity being stabilized at 8.3 and above was super important. And I thought we were at 8.3, and I'm pulling my hair out because I'm still having these issues. Well, I learned that hobbyist grade test kits are great. Please don't take this the wrong way. They're so inaccurate that you think you have a reading and you don't have that reading. It's usually a point lower than what you actually think you actually have. So knowing and understanding your consistent but inaccurate test kit discrepancies and where they are will make worlds of difference in your system. So my point being is I love Salifert test kits for quick, easy tests. They're consistently inaccurate though, but they're consistent. And
That's what matters.
Exactly. So if you don't know your inconsistencies or your inaccuracy and why and how far off it is, you think you have an 8.6 pH and 8.3 pH, when in reality you have a 7.3 and a 7.5 or 7.6 DKH.
Mm-hmm.
When your pH is suppressed and not at natural seawater levels, and your alkalinity falls below the 8.3, and this is just something that we figured out over time.
Mm-hmm.
If your pH is suppressed and not at 8.29 for say as your valley, your alkalinity is super important. I mean, super important, because alkalinity and pH play off of each other.
Yep.
So if you have a suppressed pH,
mm-hmm.
you need to keep your alkalinity at 8.3 to 9, maybe as high as 9.6 with the suppressed pH.
Mm-hmm.
Because that helps with your pH. And it also helps your corals compensate for where the inconsistencies are in your water column. So my whole point for this is we figured out how inaccurate the salifert was. And once we figured out the inaccuracies, I realized that I was running my alkalinity at 7.3
mm-hmm.
for a long time. I mean, a decade, almost a decade. And I was having issues with certain corals. And as soon as I figured out that inaccuracy, and I bumped my alkalinity to 9.3 according to salifert, I stopped losing corals to brown jelly disease.
So regardless of pH, you think it's better to maintain just a high alkalinity as like a baseline?
No, I think 8.3 is a great way to go, because if you know
pH
your
or
alk.
Okay.
If you're not maintaining your pH at 8.3 as an average,
mm-hmm.
keep your alkalinity. Don't let your alkalinity fall below 8.3. And that was where my threshold was. I think you can probably go lower. But if you're reading your test kit and it says you're at 8.3, but you're using a salifert, you're probably 0.8 to 1 point higher in reading than what you really are.
Yeah.
So take that test kit and say, okay, I need to bump my alkalinity according to this test kit to 9.3.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got your bases covered.
All right.
Your best bet is to save yourself a ton of money and start dosing Kalkwasser in your damn system according to pH, and you'll never have those problems again because your pH will be stabilized.
Well, okay, so
jelly disease. I don't see it.
So I had a look. So my average is 8.13 on the apex. I do dose calc, but I can only dose so much.
Right.
And I also have a calcium reactor with CO2, which doesn't help my cause. But
run your calcium reactor effluent through your protein skimmer.
All right, I'll try that. Actually, I haven't done that in a long time. I'll try that again.
Your protein skimmer is your biggest CO2 scrubber on your tank.
Yep.
I mean, people think that it adds oxygen to your water. It doesn't add any oxygen to your water. It just scrubs the CO2 out. Mm-hmm. And if you have a calcium reactor, everybody that has a calcium reactor, and I recommend everybody runs Kalkwasser dosing and a calcium reactor, and stop having the money pit of alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium dosing. It's a money pit. You have to buy it every single month.
Chris,
you always have to buy it.
I dose about 6 liters a day through the Kalkwasser reactor. I have the calcium reactor running at a decent amount. Plus I'm dosing about 100 mil a day of lye or whatever the heck it is as my alkalinity stuff, and on top of that. It's ridiculous how much stuff goes in there. Yeah. Sodium hydroxide is my alkalinity supplement.
You're using sodium hydroxide. What are you, nuts?
Yeah.
You were nuts. You started using potassium hydroxide a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that was trouble.
Dude, stop.
Sodium hydroxide's better. Well, maybe. We'll see. I've been experimenting with it. But that's my alkalinity solution to kill some of the carbonic acid.
Okay, so if you're using sodium hydroxide and you're comfortable using it, then why aren't you keeping your pH at 8.3? Because that's what that's going to do for you. The pH of sodium hydroxide is like 13.6.
Well,
it's only 0.2 lower than potassium hydroxide.
I'm only dosing 100 mils a day. But that's on top of I know.
I'm dosing in my systems potassium, sodium at only like 30 mils a day.
Yeah, but you're probably dosing at a higher mix concentration than I am, I'm guessing.
1/3. I do 1/3 solution. Oh my gosh, Devin, you're a nut.
I know. 283 grams per gallon is what I was mixing it at.
283 grams per gallon. Oh yeah, I'm mixing.
Yeah,
I'm doing it a lot more than that.
Yeah, mine's much more diluted. Mine's roughly the alkalinity concentration of a normal alk solution, but with a little more pH boost. That's why
We'll talk
Okay.
off of this live stream, and I'll teach you what, since you already are doing it, and I can't steer you away from doing it. I'll teach you how to do it my way,
Okay.
so that way you can actually keep your pH stabilized at 8.3 as well.
Yep. And then
and then you'll stop worrying about your alkalinity, because it'll go
That's
through
fair.
the roof, and your clothes
Yeah.
will look better than you ever looked in your
That's
in the
fair.
history of your tank.
I don't know why I was trying this, but for the last week or two, I've been experimenting with only running my protein skimmer at nighttime. And I do have soda lime pellets on it as well, but I was doing that more just to like get rid of my dips in my pH and try and keep the baseline higher. So I don't know. I experiment a lot. That's what I
It
do.
helps.
I like
it helps.
experimenting.
I mean, yeah, believe me, I do too. I mean, look
Yeah.
at the stuff that I use in my systems. I mean, I use some of the nastiest stuff on the planet in my main farm system when I first started working on pH.
I know. It's a rabbit hole.
You know, but if you do it right, and you don't go overboard, and you're conservative and you're cautious, you can do anything to your reef aquarium in minute amounts.
Yeah.
And once you figure out that you're okay, then you do a little bit more experimenting until you say, uh-oh. But sometimes with stuff I was using, uh-oh is not an option, because that meant complete disaster.
Wow.
So
I was close with the potassium hydroxide until you gave me
you
a
told me.
stern warning, and I was like, all right, big water change, tone it down.
You told me, and I was like, oh my gosh, I never should have spoke about it. Actually, I have never
Yes, you
spoken
should.
about it again. No.
I've given warning since. I've spread the good word.
I get people messaging me all the time. What's this other stuff you're using? I'm not telling you. You're a
Yeah.
hobbyist. You have a small aquarium. A small amount of what I'm using will wipe out your little aquarium quite quickly.
Hey,
So-
it's how we learn. Experiment
Sometimes you learn the hard
safely.
way,
Yeah,
right?
that's fair.
So it's like I always say, if you fail, it's the first attempt in learning, right?
You just learn one way that doesn't work.
Exactly.
I know. Okay, maybe your pH probe is off. My pH, I don't know. I'll calibrate it just for you. Receive forever.
Oh, I'm going to tell you another thing to do. Everybody tells you that you can't use anything but the Neptune probe with the Neptune system.
Yeah, any
Lies.
probe works.
No.
Like I have a GHL probe on mine or something random. Works.
I learned that there's definitely a difference between real high quality double junction probes and the ones that you get from hobbyists, or for hobbyists, which are a lot less expensive. If anybody wants to get a pH probe for their aquarium, I'm going to throw this out there on your live stream right now. Go to Atlas Scientific probes are the bomb. They are the best that I've ever used. I just replaced every single probe in my entire facility with Atlas Scientific about two months ago. And I always walk around with my Milwaukee MW102 that now has an Atlas Scientific probe attached to it.
Yep.
And I haven't had any pH discrepancies on my apexes to the Milwaukee. It's the highest discrepancy has been 0.02. And I am very satisfied. My threshold is 0.04. If it's 0.04 different, I'm recalibrating everything. If it's 0.03, I'm like, okay, we got to check this again next week and see if it's still 0.03 or if it's better.
So so does it hold calibration longer? Is it more accurate? Does it respond quicker? Like yes to all? Like what's the big difference? Okay.
Yeah, yes to all.
Okay.
And build quality. These are consumer grade probes. They're not lab grade. But the only difference between the lab grade version is the from what Gene at Reef Labs told me, he said the only difference is the thickness of the cable, which allows for less electrical interference on that cable from one point from the probe to the brain of the unit that's actually doing the reading. So the only problem with the Atlas Scientific probes is the cable is only 3 feet long, and here I am in my farm. I got like 10 feet to go from where the probe is, so I ended up having to buy some SMA cables, male to male, so that I could extend it, and I could only find the thick ones. Which, after talking to Gene, he's like, "Good, I'm glad you bought the ones you didn't, want to buy, but that was all you had offered because." The longer you go, the more interference, the less chances of the signal getting there properly. So the 3 feet is probably the threshold. The extension needs to be thicker. It's like it's like audio video. If you're going to set up an audio video setup, you're going to put monster cables on there if you want the best signal, right? Because they're built
thicker is better. Yeah.
Well, shielding, the composition of the wires going through it, everything is better about the monster cables versus a standard cheap cable you can buy at the Walmart. You know, so it's the same thing, basic concept. You know, you want the best extension that you can get your hands on, so you don't have that interference. And it actually really made sense to me because my one probe, I had it wrapped around a 2x4, and as it wrapped around, there was one big conduit, metal conduit of an electrical line running through it. And I'm like, I wonder if that was my problem the whole time. And I pulled the old probe off.
Probably.
It was.
Yeah.
But it's okay.
Yeah, if it's too close to any higher voltage stuff, usually there's interference.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I did know that, Gene told me that with those thicker SMA cables that I had to get for extensions, he's like, that's not going to allow any interference in there. You'll be perfectly fine. So I checked it too, and he was right. So I just trust Gene. Gene's a physicist, and he knows all this shit way better than I ever will. And when I have a theory, I run it by him. He's like, no.
All right.
Good idea.
Next time I buy a probe, I'll buy the Atlas one and see if it compares. I'm pretty sure it's the one I use in the Alcatronic, but not for the main tank.
I think Saltwater Aquarium
sourced
them after I told them. I think they were going to source them and try to. Ken is awesome. I love Ken.
Yeah.
Ken and Brian, the whole crew there. Mark, they're good people. Real good people.
That's awesome. Okay. Woody's Wicked Reef. Chris, Devin, at what point would you switch from 2-part to calcium reactor? In my mind is when dosing is too expensive. Like if you're spending a fortune on dosing, because calcium reactor is so cheap to run. That's the appeal. The downside is it's not the best for pH, but it is dirt cheap to run it. All right, Chris, go.
My answer is immediately start dosing Kalkwasser according to your pH and start using your calcium reactor immediately. If your tank doesn't have a huge biomass in it of corals, watch your calcium level because it's going to rise because you're dosing Kalkwasser. I think that in most cases, reefers that are new to the hobby should be just doing a drip method of Kalkwasser on a daily basis. That's for their evaporation. I'm not saying dose it at nighttime like we do because your tank's too immature. It's not going to uptake it fast enough. So if you dose Kalkwasser, you don't need your 2-part, 3-part solution. And then once your tank starts becoming more demanding for calcium, and you're not having to do the water changes to keep your calcium balanced out because it's not uptaking what you're adding with the Kalkwasser, then you put a calcium reactor on. Then you put a dosing pump on and dose your Kalkwasser according to your pH. So an immature aquarium, just dose Kalkwasser and watch your calcium. A moderately mature aquarium, you can probably just dose Kalkwasser and not even use your calcium reactor. As your tank matures even more, you're going to need the calcium reactor. So in my opinion, save the money on all this other fancy smanchy stuff and just use Kalkwasser and buy your calcium reactor now so that way you have it. When you have it, all you got to do is turn the damn thing on and you already owned it and you're not spending more money on the money pit that's called a reef aquarium.
So when you're dosing more calc than you're evaporating and your water level's rising, that's the point when you should start using the calcium reactor, or when it's not keeping up. Because that's the thing. Like, for me, I would love to dose more Kalkwasser, but it can't keep up. Right? Yep.
I can help you with that since you're using the other nasty thing.
Okay. Because if I would easily dose more calc, but if it's more than I evaporate is already going to the tank. So I'm at the limit of calc.
That happens a lot, and what I have a lot of people that were upset that they weren't able to get to the 8.29 set point on their apex to start dosing Kalkwasser. And I'm like, why are you worried about that? I'm like, I'm talking about boost your suppressed pH. What was your pH before and what is it now? Oh, I can't go above 8.2 or I'm adding too much water to my system and it dilutes my salinity. I'm like, 8.2 is awesome because I bet you peak at 8.35, 8.31, 8.3, but at least you're not valleying out at 7.6, 7.8 where you were before. I mean, I had this one guy and this was a recalibrated pH probe, and he showed me 2 probes in his tank. His valley at nighttime was at like 7.3. I'm like, it's almost a freaking calcium reactor. I mean, literally, you go down 0.3 more in pH, and you're going to be melting your corals like they're freaking, fudge on a freaking hot oven. You know?
Yeah, I know, eh? Ah, so many rabbit
It's
holes.
there is so many, but that's what's so much fun about reefing. And if you
Oh, for
want to
sure.
learn about it, there's so many aspects. You can't get bored. I mean,
It's
I
true.
have ADHD and I don't get bored with this. I think that's why I love it so much because there's always something new to go into.
I'm probably with you on that one, actually. Yeah, you're never going to learn it all, like ever. You're always learning. You're always going to find new cool things to play with. I don't know
That's why
how
I
I.
hate the word expert.
Well, there's no expert. You just learn more things. Like
I always
if
tell people that
they say
I'm
they
not
know
an
it all, they're
expert.
lying. Don't
I'm
trust
not
them.
an expert. I
No,
love it when people call me an expert and I'm like, I'm not an expert.
we're just
What do you mean?
hardcore enthusiasts.
Yeah, if I was an expert, I wouldn't be learning anymore, right?
Yeah, it's true. We spend far too much of our life and time. Well,
I'm
not
ex-
this dead rabbit holes, never ending.
I, I say I'm experienced.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned earlier, don't even worry about the elk. Worry about the calcium.
Yep. The
What's
corals will
your
tell you everything you need to know.
what's your happy range for calcium that people should target if they're, you know, ignoring their elk?
If you're dosing Kalkwasser and your calcium is going up because the demand for calcium is not enough for what you're adding,
Mm-hmm.
I would not let your calcium level go above, say, 475. And if it does go above 475, I think the threshold for calcium is right around 550 before you start seeing detrimental effects on your corals. But it's so slow and steady that it's rising that,
Mm-hmm.
corals are very adaptable and
Yep.
they can probably handle it. I think you're more worried about your fish at that point and your other inverts in your system, because the more calcium you have in there, I think it's going to affect them. Actually, I've seen it in more than one case where
Mm-hmm.
I get an ICP test from somebody that's, wondering what their calcium level really is, and they say, "Oh my God, my calcium level was all the way up to 630."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Are you seeing any problems with your corals?" No. I'm like, "What about your fish, your inverts?" Well, I did have a wrasse jumped out the other day, which I had for 4 years. I'm like, "Oh man." And then another guy had a tang that was just, looked horrible. And I said, do a big water change. And I said, and see where your levels are with your test kit. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, get that calcium level back below 500. Um,
Huh. So you think the fish, all that was from high calcium? Interesting.
I believe that firmly. I mean, I think the corals on a slow and steady increase can handle it, because I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I'll give you a perfect example. The Reef Builder Studio.
Yeah.
There was a problem with the equipment that was that was used to be tested, and one of the systems was at 1,000 ppm because
Mm-hmm.
they thought they were only at like 350, and they were adding more calcium, and it was not going up according to the test, but it was up to over 1,000, and the fish started to die. The corals
Mm-hmm.
were fine. It was such a slow and steady increase that the corals didn't get bothered by it, other than the fact that they were losing a little bit of color, and there was minor issues.
Yeah.
But the fish were affected by it the most. And I think that, water parameters for fish should be equivalent to what you keep them for corals, because the fish came from the same place the corals did. Why are you not worried about those water parameters as well?
Yeah.
The fish need it just like the corals need it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes sense. That's crazy though. I've never heard of fish jump because of high calcium, but someone in the chat said they had a similar thing happen too. Crazy.
I had people, I think you're one of them, that had fish die from high potassium.
No, I didn't lose anything. I
You're not
wasn't. I
looking.
wasn't over that line. You just said I was getting close to it, and I was like, "Oh crap!" So I did like a 50-gallon drum water change that night for good measure.
I had a customer of mine that was it was right in the beginning, right when I first went on with you. He came down, and I made the mistake of teaching him how to use the really nasty one, and he misunderstood everything I said, wrote it down wrong and everything. I wish I would have read his notes, because he was dosing them opposite. His
Yeah.
his potassium level went all the way up to like 680, and he had a ton of wrasses, and wrasses do not like the potassium level going that high. And one day, every single wrasse in his system, it was like overnight, the night before they were
Oh,
fine, the next day they were all dead
dang,
or on the floor, like they either committed suicide or died.
dang.
And I went over everything with him, and I'm like, dude, I didn't tell you to do that. He's like, yes, you did. I'm like, do not put words in my mouth, because that's not what I said. Why would I tell you to do opposite of what I'm doing? I said, anyway, he realized that he did screw up, and he doesn't use the stuff anymore, and he only just keeps his pH at an average of like 8.2 in the morning at the valley, and it goes up to like 8.36 during the day. So
yeah,
it's too much of a swing for me. I think my swing's at like 0.08, which is, in my opinion, ideal. My alkalinity on one of my systems, though, is still at 13.6, and it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, someone in the chat's asked a few times about, should I run calc on my 30-gallon? Absolutely, you can run on any size tank. It doesn't really matter. Tank size.
Just monitor.
Just don't overdo
calcium.
it. Yeah,
just
and
monitor your calcium.
And yeah, it's interesting. See, I never even worry about the calcium that much. But okay, but I've never.
You have
I guess
a mature system, though.
Yeah, that's fair.
Your system's mature, and you're probably matching
Fair
your
enough.
demand. You know, I have.
It's hard to keep up with my demand. Actually, no, I have had to add copious amounts of calcium recently for whatever reasons. It's just been super low.
My calcium reactors on my system, and with the calc dosing, I still about once a month. I let my calcium. I know when my calcium gets down to around 390, 385. I'm like, okay, it's time to add some calcium chloride. And I know exactly how much to add to each of my systems to get it back to right around the 420, 430 range. Yeah. And it takes almost a month for it to get back down into the 390 range. But I don't believe in keeping it dead nuts on 420, 430. I don't think that's important, because I obviously see no ill effects of me letting it, dosing it and then it going down over a month, and then dosing it back up and it going back down. It doesn't have an effect on the corals, just like the effect that everybody kept telling me I was going to have with alkalinity being at 13.6. I say, why don't you come over and ask my corals if they're unhappy, because they'll tell you different.
Okay, so calcium, you keep it around 430-ish as you're happy, restore it back to place, and drips down 390-ish.
I tell people 390 to 420 is ideal.
And then in your mind, what's too high?
Over 500. I just don't like that number.
All right, that's fair. So 450 is fine. Keep it under 5.
Sure. I mean, 450 is fine, but I'm asking the question, why?
Just curious, what's too high?
Well, I mean, if
people love numbers, they're going to ask. So I'm asking.
I think that's the biggest problem with our industry. People chase numbers and worry about their numbers, and it's the most ridiculous thing. I learned the hard way for 10 years doing it the wrong way. I switched from Kalkwasser when I first started reefing to this balling method to back to Kalkwasser and calcium reactor. And I'm going to myself, in that gap between Kalkwasser and Kalkwasser, how much money did I waste? I could buy my house probably with the amount of money I wasted in 15 years. I'm serious. I mean,
that's fair.
Ridiculous. When you have 18,500 gallons of water you're maintaining with a 3-part solution, it's freaking expensive.
Oh, yes.
I mean, the money we save on an annual basis by dosing Kalkwasser is, I mean, in 3 years, you could probably almost buy a house, a small house, or a very, very badass car.
Yeah. So, okay. So you dose your calc, you just mix a big batch up, and then you drip it to your tank to mix a new batch up. I
dose it.
Yeah. Okay. So you dose it from your batch.
It's dosed, not dripped.
Sorry.
That's
Either
okay.
way, it goes from your container, your pre-mixed container, to the system. And in mine, I just feed RO, just constant drip through a calc reactor, just, I don't know, space efficient. Do you, I guess on your systems, it's not even like a thing to use a calc reactor. It just makes more sense to just do the big drum and dose it.
First of all, nobody made a calc reactor that was big enough. And then after I tried a small calc reactor, I realized that they were so inconsistent with the saturation in the fluid going into your system. The biggest problem with calcium hydroxide dosing or Kalkwasser is you got to make sure that you're maximum saturated to get the results that you're looking for. If you're if you're using a cheap Kalkwasser that you bought at the grocery store called pickling lime, that's probably got so many contaminants in it that you don't even know about.
Wages. Yeah.
Pickling lime, it's this is what I don't understand. If you're reefing
Yeah.
and you love and you absolutely have to have that Jason Fox home wrecker that was $1,000 for a frag that was this big, but you're putting the cheapest shit in your aquarium to keep that $1,000 frag alive, please, I don't want to talk because I don't understand. It makes absolutely no sense to me. Buy the best raw materials that are on the market if you want to keep your corals long term, because cheap Kalkwasser will build aluminum in your system. If you build up aluminum in your system, you don't have enough photosynthesis going on with the algae growing to remove the aluminum fast enough to keep it from becoming toxic to wipe out your entire aquarium. I've seen it. People didn't believe me. They used cheap grade Kalkwasser.
Yep.
They did it for 2 years. It took that long, and all of a sudden they had a massive tank crash. They do an ICP test. It's so toxic they can't even get it out by doing one water change. They got to do like a 60 to 80 or almost 100% water change to get it down to levels that are manageable again. So don't buy cheap raw materials for your aquarium, folks. Just buy the best.
And I want to stress this for the no water change group. This is more important for you guys too. If you do big water changes or water changes once in a while, I mean, it's going to be more diluted and it's not as an issue, but people that never do water change, those impurities eventually add up and then eventually they'll cause trouble.
You're exactly right. I mean, it's like alkalinity buffers are also a big contributor to tank crashes, and nobody talks about it. I'm not mentioning any companies by name, but soda ash is like the worst thing you can throw in your aquarium for an alkalinity buffer. And there's a lot of companies out there that promote it, and I know different because I've tested almost every brand on the market, and they almost all have contaminants in them. They're minute, but when you're dosing 300 mils to your 600-gallon tank every single day, it builds and builds and builds. And oh, my acros just had another problem. That's acros. No, it's cheap raw materials that you're putting in your aquarium. And if people don't believe it, I've got all the test results, and I've got a customer that is a firm believer in what I say now because he was a skeptic too. And the raw materials are so important. And
that's fair.
There's the 5 major brands that are out there. Be careful. That's all I got to say.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say.
Wild West out there. So
it is.
That's a good reason to do a water change once in a while. Do you know what's funny?
Do water changes.
I am terrible, and I think I've only done one since my kid was born. And I'm actually today, nice. I'm like, I pulled out the 55-gallon drum. Like, that's it. I'm going to do a big water change. I haven't done one in like 4 months. I'm like, I'm going to do one just for good measure. It's been 4 or 5 months now.
Was it because I was going to be on with you tonight? Did you think about it? Say, maybe I should say I'm doing a water change tonight?
I don't know. I was just sitting there, and I was just like, it's been a while. I'm like, I really got to set up my automated one again, but it's been a while. And then sometime like today, I'm like, hey, that's it. I'm going to do one just for, makes me feel better every once in a while.
That's cool.
Preventative.
Well, I actually am steering completely away from water changes on all my farm systems because, when you have 18,500 gallons of water and you're supposed to do a 10% water change per week, 1,800 gallons of water changes a week. I mean, do the math on that. I mean, how much money am I saving by not doing water changes on my systems on a weekly basis? But I removed a ton of expenses, and I've added minute expenses back, which my minute expenses are the Kalkwasser. Yep. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago when we had our first live stream together was when I replaced the media in the calcium reactor on the first system I started boosting my suppressed pH in. I just added new calcium reactor media to that 3 weeks ago, and I was doing that monthly before I started boosting my pH.
Yeah.
So it went from a monthly thing of melting 20 kilograms of media to melting 20 kilograms in 2 years.
Yeah,
so
that's solid.
The savings,
huge.
The savings is huge. And then no water changes, the savings is huge. No alkalinity buffer, I still have to dose the calcium, but it's, literally, I think it's 2 full cups in the big system, which is 5,000 gallons, 2 full 2-cup measuring cups once a month. And then all the other systems, it's like 1 2-cup measuring cup once a month.
Nothing.
A 5-gallon bucket lasts me about 6 months, where it used to last me about a month and a half.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
It adds huge. Up. It's awesome though. And now that I'm also working on the minor and trace elements, and we've got those dialed in, what's the point of doing a water change if you're monitoring trace elements in your ICP test that you get on a weekly basis, come back and you have no problems? I mean, why would you do water changes if everything is dialed in where you're supposed to have it dialed in?
Warm, fuzzy feeling. All right.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to let you answer this, Chris. They're asking, what's the best brand of kelp? What do you recommend? What's high quality? What do you got?
There's only one brand that I will ever promote. It is Captivate Aquaculture's Reef Blueprint Isolate CaCO parentheses 2, which is calcium hydroxide. It is all I use. I've been using it now for 3 years, and I knew when Chris got a bad batch the one time, the certificate of authenticity was not the correct certificate that was sent to him on the batch that he received. And the first time I put the Kalkwasser in my vessel, I put in exactly what I always put in from his batches, and I was unable to obtain a 12.44 pH in that solution. And I'm looking at it going, this isn't right. I added an extra, I take a 300 mil measuring cup and I fill it up in a 55-gallon barrel, and that max saturates 55 gallons of water to 12.44 pH with Chris's Kalkwasser because of the purity of it.
12.44, is that what max saturation is?
At room temperature.
Okay.
If your temperature is say, like we have problems down here with saturating our Kalkwasser this time of year. Well, we had a kind of a fluke for like 2 weeks. We were in the 90s down here, and my water in my vessels was over 80 degrees. And I couldn't get above like 12.35, and I thought it maybe was a bad batch of Kalkwasser again. So before I even called Chris Wood, I said, wait a minute, let's take a gallon of RO water and put it inside and let it get down to room temperature, and then let's put 6.5 grams of Kalkwasser in it and let's see what happens. So I did, and the pH was at 12.43. I'm like, that's good enough for me. So if you have the colder the water that you're mixing it in, the more will go into saturation. Now, if you mix it up in cold water, like 50-degree water, you can get a pH of probably close to 13 out of it.
Really?
But as soon as that temperature rises,
it drops.
All of it settles back out of solution. So, Devin, I hate to do this on a live stream, but I have to run to the bathroom.
That's fine. Go. 2
seconds. I'll be right back.
All right. Okay. So now I'm debating if I should put a pH probe in my Kalkwasser. I generally haven't bothered because I will just put a random scoop in every once in a while because it's in a calc reactor. And then my theory is that bumps whatever saturation back up to max again. But I don't know for sure. This is my theory. I'm pretty sure it's correct, but I might have to buy an Atlas Scientific probe now and put one in, so we'll see. On a prior tank, my only worry about doing this, I'm curious if any of you guys do in the chat, is I feel like the higher pH will need to be calibrated a lot more frequently on the probe. And that's one reason I haven't done it yet, was because I've been debating, is it just a make work project? I don't know. So if any of you guys do put a pH probe in your Kalkwasser, I'm curious how often do you have to calibrate it? And is it worth the effort? Or do I just keep adding a scoop every week or two and then it's fine? Now I'm debating the K1 Kalkwasser. Yeah, so I'm using the K2 on my water box, and it works pretty well. There's a few things I would change on it. I've been debating trying to like DIY some improvements, so we'll see. It falls off in a few weeks. Yeah, so that's the thing, right? So does the pH probe calibration fall off in a few weeks, or does the calc potency fall off? pH in your Kalkwasser does the submerge all day. All right, Chris.
Sorry about that.
While I was gone, I was ranting about the fact that I haven't put a pH probe in my calc reactor. I'm a little bit curious too, but at the same time, I feel like I just have to calibrate all the time and it'd be a make work effort. I tend to just add an extra scoop of calc, like a quarter cup of calc every like 2 weeks or so, just to like boost up the saturation a little more.
Yeah, you definitely have a suppressed pH in your Kalkwasser reactor. I definitely would put a pH probe in your reactor. Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, if there's a port for it, you can put it in. I would do it because that's super important.
But how often am I going to have to calibrate this? Is it going to be a constant pain in the butt, or is it? Will it actually?
Yeah.
All right.
It'll hold. Hold. I don't put it this way. I went probably 6 or 8 months without calibrating a pH probe on all my systems because I like redundancy. I bought the Milwaukee MW102 that has the temperature probe on it.
Yeah.
I bought that so that I could, instead of having to worry about whether my probes were off, I have one probe to check to make sure it's accurate.
Yeah.
And then I use it to check the accuracy of the other probes. So that's what I would do. That's I know all hobbyists aren't necessarily going to buy all this extra equipment. I have to, or I'm going to pull my hair out.
All right.
With all the extra work I have with calibrating when you break it down with the calcium reactors, the pH probes, in the main systems, there's 14 probes to calibrate. That isn't fun. I hate calibrating. Probe calibration day sucks.
Yeah, I know. I feel you. And then this probably isn't the best solution in the world, but once I calibrate one, I'm like, I still have the packs open. And it's probably a little bit of contamination, but I do a little RODI dip and wipe it off. I'm like, might as well make use of all my packs and go calibrate the rest of them.
That's what I do.
Yeah, exactly.
I do that. I do the same thing, and then I always go back to the first probe I calibrate, which is my handheld.
Yeah.
And I put that probe in the solution.
Make sure it's still good.
And make sure it's still reading 7 and 10. As long as it's still reading 7 and 10, you're good to go.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. I like your logic. God, I'd have to buy a handheld pH probe. Jeez. Okay.
The only one, in my opinion,
Which one?
MW102. Milwaukee MW102. I need to start getting some royalties from that because I put that stuff out all the time.
MW102. All right. Okay, 2-in-1 pH probe.
The 101 is just a probe.
Yeah.
The pH probe. The 102 has the temperature sensor. And if you're going to get just the probe, it just makes it more difficult to calibrate because
that's fair.
It's all by pH.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. pH is by temperature as well. If your temperature is different, your pH is going to be different. So if you're not calibrating according to the pH of the system, it's not going to be accurate. And I had a guy bought the 101 because it was, I think, $30 cheaper, $20 cheaper, and he's been having nothing but problems getting at, I calibrated this one and now it's reading, 7.02 or 0.5 or 7.1 because the temperature of the solution he's using is either warmer or colder than what it was when he originally calibrated it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The extra money saves you headaches and saves you money in the long run when you break it down.
That's fair. All right, maybe I'll get that. I might put a probe in the calc reactor because I'm curious. As long as I don't have to calibrate it constantly, that'll do it.
You won't have to. As long as the probe is there, it's the probe itself is not the problem. It's the quality of the equipment that it's hooked up to.
Fair.
I mean, think about it. The pH probe doesn't do the reading. The pH probe sends a signal back to a brain that interprets the reading.
Fair point.
So if the probe is the cheapest probe you can find on the market, you're gonna have to calibrate that damn thing all the time. You buy it, and the Milwaukee's not the best, but it's what we found to work extremely well. And I buy calibration solution and buy that freaking 100-pack. So,
are you using the Milwaukee probe or the Atlas Scientific probe on your Milwaukee meter?
Atlas Scientific.
All right.
I used the Milwaukee probe for probably a year and a half, and I was happy with it. But now that I got the Atlas on there, I actually do see a difference. I calibrate less.
All right, that's fair.
I used to calibrate every 2 weeks on my handheld. Now I calibrate probably once a month just because. I don't even have to half the time.
Okay. All right, I might try this because I am curious legitimately now to just know if I'm staying at full saturation with my calc. Or if my method of just putting a scoop in every 2 weeks to buffer it up a bit before I, every 6 to 8 weeks when I dump it out and refresh it, if that's working. Right. In theory it is, but we'll find out.
In theory it is, but I think that you'll be pleasantly surprised or unpleasantly surprised, as I say, that it's not staying saturated for that whole period of time.
Yeah, it's probably true. But that's the thing. It could be hey, even if I set it up on one of the controllers, be hey, add another scoop, send me an alert, top that baby off, keep it saturated.
Right. Yep. And also, I mean, you're in Canada, so you probably don't have to worry too much about the temperature getting above 80 degrees in your solution.
My tank actually, it's oddly, I don't know why, but the tank beside me, it runs way cooler. My other tank runs way hotter, and they're 20 feet away from each other, probably. Pumps.
I mean, that's a big heat exchanger for aquariums is the pumps that you're running on them. Yeah. The DCs definitely run cooler, But they're still run warm too. Then it's still going to heat your water up.
That's fair. That was actually honestly one of the original reasons I turned my UV off to like lower the temperature in the tank. But now I might turn it back on. So
I would turn it back on. I'd love to see what happens and hear what happens from your experiences.
I have UV on both tanks. I'm gonna turn them both on later, and we'll see. All right. See,
very cool. Very cool.
I know.
Well, the more people that know, the more data we can get, the more plausible things become, and that's
true. Okay. UV with high flow. We'll see what happens. See if anything noticeable happens. Gotta calibrate all my probes tonight. Yeah, I mean, it is good to calibrate them once in a while. And if you do one, you might as well do them all. You got the packet open anyways. Make use of it.
Yeah, and I think I use the 7 and the 10.
Yeah.
It's usually what I end up doing. I usually end up sacrificing one set, and I'll take the 7 and stick the probe in. Yeah. And if it reads, 7 or 7.01, 7.03 is my 0.03 is my threshold. Anything above or below 0.03, it's got to be recalibrated.
That's fair.
So if I put it in the solution and it reads 7.01, 7, or up to 03, I'm fine with my calibration on that probe. If it goes above that, then I calibrate. Yeah. And that way I have one packet of solutions, the 7 and 10, that gets sacrificed to making sure that my probes are accurate. I'm a cheap ass. There's things cost $1, and I'm like, I'm saving $1. I'm saving $1. I'm like, really?
Well, that's why I calibrate everything. I'm like, it's already open. Might as well use it.
Me too. I mean, but when you have 14 probes to calibrate, it's only $14, but getting them in sometimes lately. Actually, 2 years ago, it was like a nightmare. I think I was pulling my hair out because I was like, I need my solutions, and the damn courier's not getting them to me.
Well, the thing that gets me afterwards too is because I have all the auto testers as well, and they all have pH probes. I'm like, hey, the calcium reactor one, the tank one, the auto tester pH probes. It's a lot of probes. It really does add up. It's you're into a friggin' hour or two of running around calibrating.
I know. I mean, I know the days that I decide I'm calibrating, it's usually never set in stone when I'm going to do it. And for whatever reason, I always pick the day that my manager Daniel plans on fragging all day long, and he wants me to help Justin, our another employee, do the packing. Yeah. And I'm calibrating probes and trying to help that. I'm like, Dan, you got to stop fragging. I'm calibrating probes right now. But it literally takes me like 3 hours to calibrate the probes. I mean, it's a pain in the ass.
Everyone you hit calibrate, you wait a few minutes, come back, calibrate the next step, and it takes a while for sure.
And then you stick your probe from your system into the calibration solution to see if it actually still reads exactly what it's supposed to. It's not reading right. Recalibrate. Oh gosh. Yeah. You know how many times I have to recalibrate? It's not even funny. Like, it's just like depressing. Like, I thought I got you done. I thought you were okay.
Dang. Now, how often do you actually calibrate your probes?
Only when my readings are different from my Milwaukee that I calibrate regularly. See, I kind of thought about this logically. The smart way to do it was to make one probe be the one that you calibrate frequently, and you test your other probes. So what I end up doing every week, I take my Milwaukee and I put it literally right next to the Apex Atlas Scientific probe. Yep. And I let them sit there for a half an hour. And I come back, turn the probe on, and like I said, if they're 0.03 or less different, I don't even worry about it. As soon as it gets outside of that, that's when I go through and I have to calibrate that particular probe. But usually, if one of them's off, I have to do them all. But I think on average, it's like every 3 to 6 months I have to actually calibrate all the probes.
Okay, that's fair. I think I put a calendar reminder for every 4 months, but I probably wait till 5 or 6 by the time I actually do it. So. Yep. Okay, sounds about right. Do you use the one-use packets, or do you have like the bottles that you do it?
Just one-use packets. It's just easier. I mean, it's so nice having that temperature probe. So now I don't have to walk around with a cup of water to put into my system to get the water temperature acclimated so that I'm calibrating properly. What a difference.
I throw all the packs and just let them float around the tank for like 20 minutes first.
I used to do the same thing.
Yeah. Hey, that's a good way to do it.
And Milwaukee saved me a lot of time on that aspect of it too.
All right, you may have sold me on one of those. I'll buy another pH probe. I don't know about the Milwaukee yet. We'll see. I might get a
I'm
handheld.
telling you, Milwaukee needs to grandfather me into some royalties with all the stuff I talk about.
You should work out a deal with them. Be like, hey, all those sales that came right here.
How many MW102s have you sold in the last 2 years? And what was your average the 2 previous years?
Yeah.
Maybe my talking about it helped.
Say you're welcome. Yeah, who knows?
I'm just being funny.
Yep. But yeah, I don't know. That's actually a good question. So you use a temperature probe so you don't have to carry around a cup of water. However,
yes,
you're still calibrating everything else that needs it to be the right temperature.
So it's hooked up to the apex, has a temperature probe hooked up to it, and it reads it off the temperature of the apex. So that's it.
Yeah, but that's
Done.
reading the tank water, not your pH calibration fluid. So you still should float it. That's my only point.
Yes.
Okay. That's all.
Did I say I didn't?
Yeah, you see, you don't have to carry around your cup of water because it has the temp probe, which is fine for that. But if you're calibrating everything else, it doesn't help.
No, the guy makes a good point. I totally had a brain fart right there because no, I do have to walk around. I don't know what I was thinking when I was talking about it. I do still walk around. I was thinking about the Milwaukee.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
So yeah.
I said to bug you. Okay.
No, hey, call me out when I say something that's wrong. I'm a big boy. I can take it. I messed up there.
Happens to the best of us to do all the time. All right, David. So does re-stirring the settled Kalkwasser at the bottom help you, or do you have to add more? It will help to a certain extent, but it will eventually lose its juice.
Atmospheric CO2 plays a big role in that. If you're using a calc reactor like you're using, Devin, that's sealed and doesn't have any atmospheric air hitting the solution, the Kalkwasser that's in the bottom of that, if it is of high purity, should completely dissolve in the solution and you should have nothing left in the bottom when it's spent. If you have low-grade calcium hydroxide, you will always have sediment in the bottom, and stirring that isn't going to help. It's only going to stir up more in contaminants and add them to your aquarium and cause you problems in the long run.
So I'm picturing one guy right now, and he has a calc reactor that's about that thick of calc inside of it. I'm just like, that can't be a good solution. But anyways, that just popped into my mind when you were saying that.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem that I had, I have an employee that is amazing, and I taught him a lot, and he listens to everything I say, and he begged me to allow him to relieve me of a duty that I said I would never relinquish to anybody, and I trust the guy, so I let him do my Kalkwasser bins.
Yeah.
And he was adding extra Kalkwasser, so he didn't have to. We have to fill our calc vats twice a week.
Yep.
So he was adding on Mondays or Tuesdays when we refill them from the weekend. He was adding twice the amount of Kalkwasser. So he could just go around on Fridays when he had to top them off and just stir them up and not have to add Kalkwasser. Well, what he didn't understand when I was explaining it to him was that the atmospheric CO2 plays a huge role in whether that whether that powder that settles to the bottom is still viable or not as Kalkwasser. And I don't know, a lot of people don't know this, but when you're mixing up Kalkwasser, if you mix up exactly what you're supposed to, which is 6.5 grams per gallon, which will dissolve completely in purified water, if you let that open to the atmospheric air, the very surface of that solution will get this crusty little film that almost looks like ice. That's carbonates, because CO2 wants to go inside the water. Like CO2 is just like, let me in. Let me in. And then it says, ooh, there's calcium hydroxide here. Let's bind with you. Let's create carbonates. So what ends up happening is your solution becomes weaker because it breaks it out of the calcium hydroxide and creates carbonates at the surface, which then when you break that surface tension, that ends up settling to the bottom. So over time, you get a buildup of carbonates at the bottom, which, yes, you can use those carbonates to dose to your aquarium, but I don't recommend it. And then over time, your powder at the bottom is basically just useless because of atmospheric CO2. And I've got a bunch of different theories on how to fix that. I've gotten a lot of ideas over the years of dosing Kalkwasser on how to fix that problem, and I just haven't implemented the one that I think is most plausible, which is take a 55-gallon trash bag and stick that in, put your Kalkwasser and your water inside of that, and then tie that tight around your
dosing.
and then that way it sucks in tight as it's pulling, and no air mixes. It's just water leaving. And
They
you don't have the
make
atmospheric CO2.
There's some kind of like, I don't know if it's like a medical thing, but there is bags that specifically are for that, something along those lines.
You can get medical bags for like hospitals. They have that.
Maybe that's what it is. I've seen them, like a product that's for some other use, but it would work perfectly for that.
They don't make it big enough for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. But for the normal person, it could work if you want to be extra hardcore.
Yes, that would work great.
Yep.
I mean, IV drip bags would work great for people dosing Kalkwasser if you only dose to, a couple liters.
Yeah, if you have a nano tank.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yep.
It's a great way to keep your aquarium happy and healthy and not have to worry about all the extra additives that you have to go with, unless you're going to go with the minor and trace element aspect of it, which I do recommend everybody at least dose. Maybe not go into the geeky details like I do and do ICP tests every single week and add an extra drop of this, an extra drop of that. I'm serious. That's how I was for the longest time until I got it dialed in. It took me almost 2 years to dial in minor and trace dosing.
Weekly ICPs is a hardcore level. Yeah.
It is. Well, I'm lucky that I have a really good friend of mine that has an ICP lab right down the road from me, and I can get a test done whenever I want to.
That is extremely convenient. But how much did you learn by doing that weekly and seeing how things change as you dosed it?
God.
Huge.
It's invaluable, man. I mean, what I learned about a reef system in 2 years is just mind-blowing. Most people will look at me and call me nuts. I mean, Richard Ross told me I was crazy, and I'm like, okay. I saw it for myself. I'm not spewing diarrhea out of the mouth here. It's real data. I'll show you every ICP test that I ever did since Reef Labs has been available to me, because I have them all saved in my profile. Yeah. And I almost shared the whole profile with him one time just to prove him wrong. I'm like, I'll prove you wrong. But he didn't get to that point. Richard's a good guy. He likes to bust my balls about a lot of things, but he always takes it all back eventually.
Yep. So I guess here's just like a generic question, but what would you say is the most valuable thing you learned from doing a weekly ICP test over a year or two?
Wow. How important copper is.
Yeah.
I mean, I was always told that copper is bad. Without copper in your reef aquarium at 9 parts per billion, you do your corals, your algae, and every living thing that's in there an injustice, because copper is nasty, but at the same time beautiful. Because without copper, photosynthesis is not performed properly. Photosynthesis will happen, and zooxanthellae and all the other algae in your system that are removing the nutrients, and the zooxanthellae is producing sugars to feed your corals, and all the beautiful things that algae do in your aquarium that are part of photosynthesis. They're not doing things efficiently. Let's put it that way. Without copper. Copper is a very important component in photosynthesis. And that was probably one of the biggest things that I had to wrap my head around and start dosing. And it was probably about 6 months into the ICP test. It was showing zero copper all that time. And I'm still going, something's still not going right. Other things are getting closer to being more dialed in. But my copper's still showing zero, but I'm also noticing my scrubbers are growing, but they're not growing like they should be.
Yeah.
My corals look good, but they're not glowing like they should. So Chris Wood and Gene both said, well, why don't you dose some copper? And I'm like, well, I got plenty of copper sulfate. And I looked at the bottle and it said 1 drop treats 2,000 gallons to get you to
Yep.
natural seawater concentrations of copper. So I'm like, okay, all my systems are, between 1,600 gallons and 5,000. So let's put 1 drop in every system. And it was so funny because I'm doing this, and this is
it's like tick, in this like massive volume of water.
I had this customer coming for a curbside pickup, and I'm walking over to him to greet him because I didn't let people in my building during the whole COVID thing, and I'm walking over and I'm screwing the dropper cap back on a bottle of copper.
Yeah.
And he's like, "What you dosing?" I'm like, "Copper." He's like, "You just put copper in your reef?" And I'm like, "Yep." And he's like, "You put copper in your reef tank? What are you, crazy?" And I'm like, "Yep." And I'm like, "Listen," I'm like, "Copper's important, and you got to have it in your system." And I had 0, so I put enough in to get it to natural seawater levels. If you go up, that's when you see problems.
Too much is bad. All is well in moderation. That goes for most things.
Exactly.
Yep.
So that was probably one of the things I learned that I thought was very valuable to our systems. I think the second thing, actually, I'm going to combine 2 elements into the second thing because I'm a Ghani man. I love my Gonioporas, and I used to just pull my freaking hair out when you have a Ghani doing amazing for months and then just and never open up again. And what the heck did I do to that coral? And if you want to keep Gonioporas long term and farm them like we do, I mean, I have strains of Goniopora that we've had for 5 years now. I don't think they were as affected by vanadium and manganese as what other species were. But once we got vanadium and manganese to natural seawater levels in our systems, not just the Ghanis we've been farming for years before that, but every Goniopora that we have is just will blow your mind with the polyp extension, the colors, the
Interesting
health.
So I do dose those, not knowing that there's any correlation to Ghanis, but I also have Ghanis that have been doing fantastic for a long time in my tank. Maybe that plays into it. I'm assuming it is after hearing that statement. So,
well,
yep.
I'm going to go into that in a little bit more depth.
Right.
Not just vanadium and manganese, but all of your minor and trace elements that we know are able to be utilized by organisms. They are very important for your ecosystem. And it's not just they don't. My personal opinion and theory on the whole thing is I don't think that your corals are affected directly by the minor and trace elements. The ecosystem that you have is affected by the minor and trace elements, meaning the microfauna, like the bacteria populations that are growing in your system, that in somebody's aquarium that does not dose a minor and trace supplement every day has less species of bacteria living in their system. It's been proven with aquabiomics testing, with Gene and myself.
I have one sitting beside me I still need to send in. I did one like a year ago. I'm curious to do like a follow-up one now and see how the systems change or compares. Yeah. Anyways, side tangent.
Don't do it until you start doing a kind of a broad spectrum minor and trace supplement. When you're adding,
I do that though.
Oh, you do? Okay, so you're in good shape.
I dose a broad spectrum one on a doser, and then when I remember, I dose weekly, which doesn't happen every week, but I do have some I tweak.
You're one of those large reefers.
Large reefers?
No, large.
Oh, lazy ass reefer? Yeah. It's called I had a child, and then I have no free time anymore, and I still work in kids and somehow make YouTube videos and live stream.
Cheers,
but yeah.
Cheers to kids.
Oh, it's empty, but
cheers to working all the time.
There's a sip left. But yeah, so it's pretty bad. I'm very sporadic at it, but I do have a broad spectrum on the doser, and I have the ones I attempt to dose once a week when I remember. but there is, yeah.
We do everything on a doser, but it took me a year and a half, almost 2 years before I would even think about putting my minor and trace elements.
I just need more dosers. This needs to be automated. That's the solution.
No.
Yes.
No, you need to mix them all together.
Fair. Is there any downfall to mixing all the raw trace elements together?
If you use too small of a RODI volume, yes. There can always be an issue. If you use a large enough volume of RODI that you're mixing with, that you're doing for your daily dosing, you're okay. Because if there's too concentrated together, that's when you have the problems and you have precipitates coming out. Right. I use, on my very large systems, I use 1 gallon of RODI water is what I start with.
Yeah.
I use a 2.5 gallon bucket.
Yeah.
I mix up in that 2.5 gallon bucket with that 1 gallon of RODI water. I have to look at it. I can give you rough numbers off the top of my head for what I dose. Like my Isolate MT, there's 60 mLs goes into that for one of my systems. There's 1,500 mLs of 5,000 ppm manganese that goes into that. There's
that's so much.
Yeah, I know, right? There's 15 drops of cobalt that go into that. There's,
so
iron that goes in that. There's fluoride that goes into that.
So normal reefer scale, where I'm only dosing like 2 mils of, say, this one and a couple mils of this one, I can take a liter of water, basically pick whatever I would dose over the month and then just slap that on a doser over the next 30 days.
And then take the total volume of that solution, divide it by 30, and dose that amount every single day. Done.
Yeah. All right.
So much. But I learned a lot there, too. I was dosing way too much manganese because I was doing, for a year and a half, 2 years, I was dosing all of this by hand every morning on all my systems. I would walk around with my manganese with a 60 mil syringe and was dosing. It was a pain in the rear end. And when I finally got comfortable, I was seriously scared to death of minor and trace elements because what people don't realize, they're minor and trace. That is an important statement, minor and trace. If you overdose minor and trace, you can kill your whole entire aquarium very quickly. So that's why I was so skeptical about it. But if you want to dose them, don't be scared of them. Just don't be stupid about it.
Yeah. It's better to dose a little less than too much.
Exactly.
Almost everything.
Exactly. And if you say, well, if I have to do an ICP test every month to do that, it's too expensive for me. I understand that too. How much does your water change cost every 2 weeks? $40? Okay, that's the cost of your Reef Labs ICP test is $40. So when you start doing your minor and traces, stop doing water changes and do your ICP test and you'll be happy. You'll work it all out. There's a way to fix every problem and there's always a solution. So that was a world of difference when we put everything on a dosing pump. I dose 126 mils of my solution every day. And I ended up having to cut back my solution of manganese. I used to put 2,000 mLs of 5,000 ppm manganese in that solution. Now I'm putting 1,500. I used to put 25 drops of cobalt. Now I'm putting 12 to 15, depending on the system. So when you're dosing it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it makes a world of difference and keeps it very consistent. And your bacteria levels will boost, which will mean your corals will be fed more, which means that your corals will actually uptake the elements because of the bacteria that they're eating that need the elements to thrive in your aquarium. Did that make sense?
And I only need 1 dosing pump instead of like 8, so perfect.
1.
All right, sold. It is. It is.
See, this is the thing that people don't understand about this crazy head of mine. Okay, I came from a family that I had amazing mom and dad. They busted their ass. We didn't have 2 pennies to rub together half the time. But I learned the value of $1, and I've always learned how to save money where I can. And that was my whole solution with what I'm doing with our our systems now is I had a huge money pit. As we grew, it got to be really expensive. I had to figure out a way to cut that money pit in half or more, and I've cut it by probably 2/3 or better by doing what we're doing now compared to what we used to do. And every reefer on this planet can do this in their system. if they're willing to put the time and effort into learning how their system's going to react to everything that they're doing. If they're not willing to do that, then waste your money on your 2 and 3 part dosing. And if your corals aren't happy, wrap your head around what I said and get your head out of your rear end and start doing what I do, and you'll save a ton of money.
Yeah, well, that's fair. All right. So how is my economical dosing? Max out my calc, which is about 6 liters per day on my 200-gallon tank. Plus the calcium reactor is running, I don't know what it is, like 50 mils or 55 mil, whatever. Plus 100 mils of my elk dosing on top of it in calcium.
I think that if you can set yours to dose to a pH, and you have you're always max saturated, you should be able to achieve 8.2 with your set point.
Even with pH, the calcium reactor, that's also, because the more calcium reactor I dose, the more lower pH I'm also feeding into the tank. And that's always like the double-edged sword of it, right?
I agree. I understand what you're saying. But if you're dosing Kalkwasser 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're adding alkalinity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mm-hmm. If you add your Kalkwasser according to your pH, you're adding everything that you would add in 24 hours, you're adding it in 12 hours.
That's what I'm doing now, but I'm dosing it just at night. But I can only dose as much as I evaporate, right? I can't dose physically more than...
Oh, so you already are dosing it just at night. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I...
You're only able to achieve... What's your valley? No. What's your average?
Here, let me open it again.
I was going to say, I guarantee your solution is not max saturated. It has to be. What kind of Kalkwasser are you using?
Good question. Good question.
What are you using, son?
Not the Captivate one. What am I using? I have Brightwell's and I have the BRS one. So it's probably one of the two. I don't know which one's on there right now. It alternates of whatever's there. I have not tried your fancy one though.
My lips are sealed.
Yep. You're like,
I already know your problem. I already know your problem, and
my average
one way to fix it.
My average is 8.13. Minimum 7.98, max 8.38. Average. So now I also don't have my yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was also playing with not running the skimmer 24/7. It was actually a bit higher pH when I did that, but I was trying to run it from like opposite of my light schedule, just to experiment with capping off the lows instead.
Yeah, what did you come up with on that? What happened? Did it change anything?
Let me scroll back a bit. Yeah, so if I look back the other day, like about a week ago, my high was 8.28, my low was 8.1. But when I had fresh CO2 media in there, it was much higher, like on the scrubber.
Gotcha.
That makes a big difference. Yeah, then be up to 8.32. Yeah, so I don't know. I change things a lot. I just play. See what happens.
After we're done here, I'm going to teach you something that's going to get your pH averaged at 8.3, and you're going to be loving life.
All right.
And it's going to save you a ton of money. It's a ton of money.
All right. Now, I don't know if we should go down this.
If I tell you this, you can't be blurting it out to every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there, because you're going to have somebody getting back to you saying they nuked their tank and it's your fault.
I know nothing. Hey, I'm already dosing hydroxides and other stuff as alkalinity supplements, so I'm sure. Yep. Sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do to experiment. That's how we learn.
Yeah, I hear you. I've done some crazy things in my life too with my corals, and conservatively was the way to go, and I'm glad I did it that way, or we'd have major problems.
Yeah, it's true. Now, on that note, I think I will wrap her up pretty soon, because sadly my beverage is done and I got to run the washroom too. And I still have to figure out your secret details. But hopefully everyone enjoyed this live stream today. I know I did, and it's always love having you on. And we need to do it again sooner than a year this time, because that was far too long.
Definitely was way too long. I enjoyed it too, Devin.
Yeah. So if you guys enjoyed this, hit that like button. If you're new, make sure you subscribe. If you want some good eye candy, make sure you check out ACI Aquaculture, especially those new hammers, because dang, they look pretty awesome. All right, guys.
Thank you all for joining.
Yeah. Thanks.